This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today is Sundar Iyer. Sundar is an American entrepreneur and former employer of Cisco Systems. He was openly discriminated against by the California Civil Rights Department, who deliberately assigned him to the Hindu religion because of his ethnic background, despite himself being non-religious. We are going to discuss this very important case today, as well as how Sundar is pushing back against the CRD. Sundar, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for having me. Really great to connect with folks such as you and your audience.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. We were introduced to each other by the Atheists for Liberty at Freedom Fest in Vegas back in the middle of July. And it turns out that all the people from Atheists for Liberty were really cool. And as we were talking about before the show, when you go to a conference like that where everyone actually just believes in freedom, like it doesn't matter if you're atheist, Christian, whatever religion you happen to be, everyone was just very respectful and kind towards each other. And they introduced you to me and were telling me about your story, which is wild. And I want everyone to hear it. But before we get into the fight that you've been facing for the last 4 years, just tell us about yourself, your background, and your work.
Yeah. Alex, I came to the United States, to California in 1998. I grew up in India, and I've been in California, essentially in Silicon Valley, for the last 25-ish years. Did my grad school, master's and PhD here, and then stayed back to do and build a bunch of startups, mostly in the networking, semiconductor, and then security areas, if you will.
Yeah, so you're obviously a very successful guy, but in 2020, you ran into a little bit of trouble with the California Civil Rights Department, which, if my audience, a lot of people, they hear the term civil rights and they think, well, this has to be an organization that's designed to actually protect people and protect people that are at a disadvantage. But you ran afoul of the California Civil Rights Department in 2020. And I want you to tell us this story. They actually came after you on the grounds of discrimination. So walk us through that. Why did the CRD make these claims of discrimination against you?
Yeah, so a quick backstory here is roughly in 2015, I founded a tech startup that was funded by Cisco Systems, Cisco being the sort of big behemoth in the networking space. And in this startup, I was the CEO, and I hired a gentleman who we shall call by the name of John Doe, because he prefers to be anonymous. And John Doe was a batchmate of mine back from India, from our undergrad days. And he wasn't performing, and due to which later on he filed a case for caste discrimination, saying that he was not promoted, blah, 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 and discriminated because of his lowest caste status. And we'll delve into caste in a moment. Now, none of this is interesting to your viewers, except for what happened after that, which is he went to the California Civil Rights Department, which is an employment discrimination agency, that actually took up the case and filed a caste discrimination case on behalf of the state. And where the saga begins is essentially, will unravel over these next 30 minutes, is the sordid actions of this state agency to cook up a false case. Right? So that's the backstory.
Yeah, and you're not religious at all.
That is correct. And just for context, what the state of California essentially did, and this is in particular the Civil Rights Department, we'll call it the CRD for this audience. The CRD essentially stated that because I am Hindu, their prescription of religion to me, and essentially that Hinduism is bigoted, and I happen to be practicing the so-called religious practice of caste, hence I was casteist to this other employee, right? These are the sort of statements made by the Civil Rights Department. Now, there are key problems with that, independent of the many other things they're doing in this case. They knew I was irreligious. And in fact, they interviewed me. I even shared with them that I've essentially been irreligious all my life. They couldn't care less. And they said that I practice the Hindu concept of caste being what they call a strict Hindu religious hierarchy. So they blatantly violated my First Amendment freedom of religion rights. by assigning me a caste and specifying that such a caste is a practice of Hinduism. So essentially saying I'm Hindu and I'm Hindu and casteist, essentially.
Yeah, and this might be a good time for my audience that might not be familiar with the caste system. How does that work? If you could explain that to my audience before we move on to how you started pushing back against the CRD.
Yeah, so I mean, if you wanted the simplest, I would say the highest understanding of caste, look at every ethnicity and every ancestry and every country in the world and ask, do people have prejudices against each other? So you have the class system, you have a feudal system, you have a tribal system, what have you. So in India, there are these sort of ancient hierarchies of so-called social hierarchies. Part of it is intertwined with religion, part of it may be independent of religion, but it just happens to be, what the UK calls the class system could be very much a caste system in India. And now these are, obviously they're all legally outlawed, and people may practice whatever they want to practice. If someone wakes up in the morning and says that they are of a superior caste, well, they have the right to do that. They can do whatever they want and whatever they want to believe. Of course, they do not have the right to discriminate against others.
Right. Yes. And so essentially the claim was made by this disgruntled employee of yours that you were discriminating against him on the basis of class. And the state of California just assumed, because of your Indian background, that you had to have been Hindu and thus in favor of the caste system, right? I mean, that's pretty much what it comes down to.
And here, that's right. And what's worse is that they interviewed me. They were explicitly told I was irreligious. I even shared with them information. They deliberately lied to make up this thing. And this is just one. Their First Amendment violation on me is really just one amongst more than 100 sordid actions of the state. And my journey here, this is not about me. I am roadkill for all that matters. What matters to me is I have personal knowledge of the state of California's actions that go all the way from white lies to constitutional violations, all the way to essentially perjury. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about some of those here in just a minute. I guess I really want to know why in particular would they take this case up against you? Like it seems like I can understand, I guess, from the perspective of kind of like the woke mindset why they would take a case up against someone who was like, a naturally born white American, but it doesn't seem like you would be the target of this kind of thing from a government agency. Why do you think that they push so hard against you in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite shocking what this particular agency has done with, their version of the truth, if you believe. I don't want to speculate on necessarily their reasons, but certain things that are clear is they wanted to create a new protected category called caste. Now, caste is already protected. You can file a caste discrimination case under race, ancestry, religion, ethnicity, what have you, right? So they wanted to create a new category. They pushed for essentially a bill to create a new bill on caste in California last year. They've been working very closely with activist organizations that are just brutally anti-Hindu and anti-upper caste Indian. I mean, just to give you a quick sense, the Civil Rights Department, these are all their statements of their platform. They claim that upper caste Indians are dominant, hostile, oppressive, privileged, cable, bigoted, tribal. The word salad would make, any orator sound, silly, if you will. But what is even worse, and this is the fact that they can do this on Indian Americans is just a symptom of what they've been doing on a number of other people. White Americans have been the target of this sort of, far left ideology pushed by, activists and unfortunately activists within the state for the last 20 years. I want to share with you one more snippet. The California Civil Rights Department claims that so-called upper caste Indians have physically assaulted or raped or spat upon something of the order of thousands of Dalit Americans, Dalit being the so-called lowest caste. In America, this would be something of the order of 5,000 to 20,000 crimes on Dalit Americans simply because of their caste. Now, here's the rub. There are zero police records of any caste-based violence in the United States. The state doesn't care a damn. They pushed this narrative for 4 years in 7 to 8 different court motions, pushing the sort of activist organization and surveys by these activist organizations simply to diss and essentially pass some of the most xenophobic and racist comments on Indian Americans.
That is a Crazy story. Well, obviously, you did not take that sitting down, which we appreciated, and you filed for sanctions against the CRD, specifically claiming that they were harassing you. So, talk to us about the legal battle that you initiated with the California Civil Rights Department.
Right. And so, just to give you context, one of the claims that the CRD made is that me and another manager were harassing their employee, their plaintiff, if you will, the John Doe. Now, what is their claim for harassment? Let me take one of their claims that they made on the other person who was named in the lawsuit. They claim that this other manager asked their plaintiff to file weekly status reports. Let me repeat that. A manager asked their plaintiff to file weekly status report that is now considered as caste-based harassment by the Civil Rights Department.
But I mean, this is just like a part of doing this guy's job, right? Like we all have to work and we have certain things you have to do. It's just what he was being paid to do, right?
That's right. And with well documented evidence that this man is not doing his job. Now, imagine the plight of any supervisor in California. My heart bleeds for all the good people in California working, supervisors and managers, and even co workers who simply want good work to be done. Imagine that their own civil rights agency is able to diss and slap them for doing their job. That this is insane.
Yeah. So do you think that it's that the civil rights agencies, they just don't like businesses, or like it doesn't make any sense to me, like any, like you were saying, or any rational person that looks at this case, it's just an open and shut example of this employee not doing his job.
Yeah, I mean, and one can file lawsuits for what have you, right? If this was a plaintiff filing a lawsuit, it's one thing. It's the state of California. And what's worse, this is what I want to share. They've done almost 100 actions which are downright false and lies. There are about 6 dates that they are manipulated in the case. But let me leave that out and let me leave facts that will come out even later. I want to focus on their one-way actions. These are incontrovertible actions of the state. We gave the state 2 years of HR records on that plaintiff. They simply hid all of that. There are 10 people who complained about this plaintiff. The state will not interview any one of them. And here's what I want to share with your audience, right? A key white engineer complained about this plaintiff. They will not interview the white engineer. An Asian engineer complained about this plaintiff. They won't interview the Asian engineer. A Hispanic engineer complained about the plaintiff. They won't interview him. 3 women engineers complained about this plaintiff. They won't, beseeching complaints from one of them. They will not interview them. And, there were 4 women prosecutors who brought this case. I asked this question, under what moral right do they wake up in the morning and pull this off, right? And what's even worse is the CRD is well known for doing this and hushing everything up. The word salad of things that I have seen for them to prevent accountability. One-way confidentiality, mediation confidentiality, prosecutorial privilege, any crap that they do comes under some, nice phrase of why they cannot be touched.
Yeah. That's so crazy to me. And you accuse the CRD of both xenophobia and racism. And, racism is one of those terms that is thrown around way too frequently today. And oftentimes the word racist is invoked. Obviously, the critical theorists use it in a systematic sort of way. And it doesn't have a lot of meaning. But in this case, it really does seem like this is obviously racist targeting. So talk to us about that. You made the accusation that they're xenophobic and that they're racist. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you a sense, and I thank you for pointing that out, right? The word racism is thrown out way too much in this country. And I just want to focus on the one-way comments by the CRD, right? As I already mentioned, there's all of these phrases, dominant, hostile, oppressive, privileged, blah. These are just, groupist comments by a so-called civil rights agency. That's bad enough. The direct targeting and accusations of rape and assault of upper caste Indian Americans with no police records. That's bad enough. But the way they have gone about this, so there are about 20 diatribes on the Hindu religion by the state. Now, I have a thick skin, and people are welcome to criticize each other for whatever they want. That's great. Criticism is beautiful. But the state doesn't have a right to talk about religion. right? It would be like the state opening up the Bible and trying to preach to white Americans or Christians about what the Bible is or is not. We have a constitution for good reason, right? So that's bad enough. But in terms of other targeting, I mean, there are statements about, Indian managers only working with each other, preventing people of the lower caste. Uh, there, are, there was a letter that they submitted by 30 anonymous people about how Indian managers were bigoted. This letter contains no data, no specifics, no witnesses, no locations, no name, no company names, no manager names, no nothing whatsoever. This is now somehow a piece of court record that they wanted submitted as evidence. I mean, if you want to target a community, and to me, I'm here not because they're targeting Hindu or Indian Americans. I'm here because they're targeting all Californians, all Americans. In fact, I would say white Americans face even more of a brunt from this kind of agency than some of us. If an agency wants to play with the truth, there is no hope for California. I mean, civil rights is meaningless without a foundation of truth, essentially.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I do want to get back to the reason why this should be so important, not just for people that are Hindu, but for Christians, for atheists, for Muslims, for everyone, because this is an extremely significant case for all of us. But you've already brought up a lot of the ways in which the California Civil Rights Department has just violated the natural rights of many American citizens and how they've clearly abused their power. I want to give you a second to talk about that just a little bit more, because I really do think that it is extremely important for people to understand how these government organizations are often weaponized against people's rights. And this is a very, very obvious and clear case of a government agency deliberately trying to target a specific group of people. So talk to us about their long history of just abusing Californian citizens.
Yeah, so I'll touch base on both of those. So first of all, the CRD has gone on many companies. So they have filed lawsuits against Riot Games, against Activision, against Tesla. And many of these cases, they create class action lawsuits. Many of them are pure templates. In fact, if you read the last class action lawsuit on Riot Games, it's like, Riot, well, not Riot, I think it was Snapchat. They discriminate against women engineers and they don't pay them enough, blah, blah, blah. Purely boilerplate templates. No information, no specifics, nothing. And they've done this. Tesla, in fact, filed a very similar lawsuit against the CRD. Now, if you follow the history, there's a certain amount of press on this. Matt Taibbi has written an expose on a three-part expose on the actions of the CRD. So what the CRD is doing is much, much worse than many of the scandals that we've seen in the state of California at a minimum. I also want to touch upon some specifics you asked. Here is an interesting facet, one amongst 100. In the CRD's case against us, they say we discriminated against someone from the lowest caste. We told the CRD that the person who was actually given the position that this guy claims discrimination for also happens to be someone else, also from the lowest caste. In fact, we told the CRD that every leadership position in my group went to another candidate who also happens to be from the lowest caste. Now, here's the important thing to your audience. Why did this candidate get the best job? Because he was the absolute best person for this job, this other person. Not because of his race, not because of his ethnicity. I hired another gentleman. He was senior to me. He happens to be Dalit. The man is brilliant. The man is hardworking. I've co-founded companies with him. You would love to have an employee such as him. That's why he got the job. The CRE doesn't care. I mean, in my startups in the past, I've awarded leadership positions to Americans, to people from Europe, Australians, Taiwanese. I mean, what have you? British. I mean, I had an advisor who was British, and we co-founded a company together. All we care about is merit, and we care about good, hardworking people.
Which is the way that every efficient business ought to be run. That should really be the only qualification for employment, even though there are these government agencies that seem to think that there should be other considerations that you have to factor in. This is, I think, not just a threat for people in California, but I think indicative of a potential direction that the entire country could go in right now. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about why this is such a serious threat. Again, not just for people that are Hindu, but for Christians and atheists and Muslims and everybody involved. Why could this be a very dangerous precedent for the future of religious freedom in the
Right.
United States?
Yeah, so just off the bat, right on that topic, my team had people who were Christian, who were Muslim, who were atheist, many different ethnicities and religious practices. Many of that I wouldn't even know what the religious practices were, and some that I did. The state essentially takes all the Indian employees within that group and essentially assigns them all a caste and says, you're all casteist. They don't care whether you're Christian, atheist, Buddhist, what have you. They will assign you religious practice, call you casteist, and push a diatribe on you. So the state is very clear that they're essentially above God, and so we're all just mere mortals that they can toy with. Second, as is very clear from the history of the CRD, that this behavior they've done to many other companies. In fact, one of the things I wanted to tell people is to come out of the woodwork. We should not be fearful of this agency. We must talk loud and clear about this agency and bring them to justice. But this case is just, I have first-hand information, and there's so many others who have first-hand information, that this is important for us to fight back. And I don't mean this as trying to make it a personal fight against the CRD. That is not the right approach. This is a fight about the truth. We must have government agencies, as everybody else, stand up for the truth. The way, and these agencies work extremely well with even omission, not just commission. That's how they screw around with the truth, to be blunt, right?
Yeah.
I give you an example and why this matters to every American, and it has nothing to do with caste. This was my fourth tech startup, and I was the CEO again of this company. I had given away 100% of my equity to all my employees. That's 100%. My employees, and in particular John Doe, this is public knowledge, made over $4 million in compensation. That's $4 million.
Wow.
The man files because he doesn't get a salary increase of the order of $5,000. Now, there's a lot more details to this, but the fact that a state agency will not drop that charge and say, oh, this man is being paid less, is a claim in the lawsuit today. When you are so frivolous with the truth that you take one data point, hide all of the other information from the judge, the activist, the jury, and we haven't even reached the juries yet, that's a very sad day in America. All of you hardworking people, whatever your color, your religion, or whatever be, you are all targets by a truant government agency that has no checks and balances, right? So that's the message I wanted to bring to your audience. They should know that. They should arm themselves with that knowledge to fight back.
And I really believe that the First Amendment is the reason why the United States was so successful for so long. We have to have the freedom of religion or to practice no religion at all. And it's absolutely essential that we respect the difference between church and state. And that's why, like for normal people like us, when you go into a business or when you get hired on a new job, you don't really ask what religion your coworkers are or what religion the business owners are, because it doesn't matter, because we all have the same set of political principles, or we should. And this is so very dangerous for the future of not just the state of California, but for our country as well. But you're one of the people that stood up and started fighting back. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that fight. You obviously, we've talked about your sanctions already, but how are you pushing back against this? How are you trying to make this right?
Right. So a few things. We filed a motion for sanctions in January 2023. The state was forced to drop their lawsuit against me and the other manager. They are still extorting Cisco Systems. And I'd like to specifically use that word, extort, because my lawyers say, do not use that word. No, that is exactly what is happening. And I would like all of America to know that. When a man makes $4 million plus in compensation and you hide that and you try to make a $5,000 salary increase, that is extortion. Cisco filed a motion to sanction the state lawyers 3 months back. They won that motion. And so the CRD's lawyers have been sanctioned. That will be on their permanent record. But they still don't care. They'll continue. I have written a 28-page complaint to Governor Newsom, to the Attorney General of California, and the Department of Justice. I want to use this forum to let everyone know that these agencies and Governor Newsom has not taken action. When and many of them tried to punt by saying, oh, well, there's some pending litigation, we don't want to get involved. That is the wrong approach. That is not the approach of a leader. A leader gets involved when they are told and given incontrovertible evidence that something wrong has happened. I have only asked them to begin an investigation, and they have refused to as yet. But that fight is on. I've written to members of Congress. I gave a short 13-minute speech and video to select members of Congress. I will do whatever it takes to bring this to notice. I do not want to make this partisan. Some of the folks in the Republican Party in California have been concerned, and they have written letters. And we've got a couple folks on the Democratic side too, including our own local legislature, Josh Becker, who has written a letter of deep concern. So we're fighting the good fight. We're trying to bring this more to the press. Mainstream media will not report this. Just so you know, last year they tried to push a caste law to target Indians. And mainstream media refused to report any of these facts. And of course, they used this Cisco case to say, oh, gee, there's caste discrimination occurring in Silicon Valley, and look how bigoted these folks are. The New York Times, Politico, Washington Post, Bloomberg, none of these folks would ever care to report the truth. The only ones who care to report the truth are, local media, folks with the free press, any form of, podcasts such as you, and, the few good ones left in journalism.
Yeah, man. Well, Sundar, we're glad you're out there fighting the good fight here. My audience, I'm sure, is going to be extremely interested to hear this interview that we had today. If they want to help you out, how can people support you and raise awareness for your cause?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, a couple of key things. In order to get in touch with me, you're welcome to email me directly. My email is sundaes@gmail.com. That's like the ice cream, SUNDAES @gmail.com. You can reach me directly. I'd love to hear from folks in California who have been targeted by the CRD. We need to put together coalitions simply to speak the truth. There is a third-party website called CasteGate, CasteGate, like Watergate, but castgate.org. It's a beautiful website on purely the public facts of the case. You're welcome to reach out to them. And anything you can do to write a letter of concern to the governor of California. What this journey that I'm focused on right now is not about me. It's not about Hindus. It's not about Indian Americans. It is simply about forcing a state agency to be held accountable for the truth. There have been copious letters written, including over 1,000 signatures, to Kevin Kish. He's the head of the Civil Rights Department. He will not answer any of these. I have accused them of over 100 malicious actions. That's what my letter shows. And I shall be making my letter public very soon. Somebody needs to make Kevin Kish stand up and be accountable.
Well, Sundar, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story. We really appreciate what you're doing. It sucks that this had to happen to you, but it's very encouraging to know that there are people like you that are willing to stand up and fight. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. And I wanted to give a shout out here to just, ordinary good people from all walks of life. I attended Freedom Fest. It was great to meet you. A shout out to Atheists for Liberty for simply saying, gee, we want to stand for the truth. The Hindu community has been, of course, very helpful. We've been working with the Jewish, Armenian community. Great to reach out to, the Christian community. We've had folks on the Black Americans who've been very concerned about, what's happening. Would love to put a coalition together and, just have people who care about the truth come together. So thank you so much for that forum.
Hey, that's beautiful. Well, Sundar, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.